Michael Turner stood on the front lawn with steady eyes, appearing like a concerned family member, yet every detail of his calm behavior hinted that the emergency unfolding inside the house was anything but unexpected. The incident that sparked the investigation began with a routine dispatch following a 911 call that immediately felt different from ordinary emergencies. The caller reported discovering an unresponsive person in their home, using calm and carefully chosen words that lack the emotional panic typically heard in distress calls. First responders reached the scene quickly, expecting a chaotic atmosphere, but the neighborhood was unusually still, with no neighbors gathered outside or signs of recent commotion. The house appeared undisturbed from the outside, with lights on and everything looking perfectly normal, almost too normal for a situation involving a life-threatening emergency. When emergency personnel entered, they were met with a scene that felt controlled, as if someone had taken time to prepare the environment before making the call. Furniture was in perfect order, surfaces were spotless, and there were no immediate signs of an accident or struggle. Even the air inside felt unnervingly calm. This lack of disorder caused quiet concern among the responders, who made note of several subtle inconsistencies that didn't align with typical emergency scenarios. The body was found positioned in a way that seemed deliberate rather than natural, as if placed to appear peaceful. What should have been a moment of urgency felt more like a presentation. The responding team documented everything carefully, aware that something about this situation was not aligning with standard cases they had encountered. The caller stood nearby during the initial checks, maintaining a composed demeanor that drew silent attention. Instead of showing visible panic or confusion, they watched closely, almost observant of how the responders were reacting rather than focused on the condition of the person on the floor. This unsettling sense of distance raised quiet suspicion. Although nothing visibly confirmed foul play, the atmosphere carried a layer of tension difficult to ignore. Every movement in the house felt measured, and every detail seemed intentionally arranged. The first report filed by responders noted the unusual calm, the immaculate condition of the scene, and the oddly structured nature of the call itself. These observations, though subtle, laid the foundation for what would soon evolve into a full-scale investigation. What initially appeared to be a straightforward emergency had now become a puzzle filled with silent questions and carefully hidden pieces waiting to be uncovered. The family involved in the case had a reputation that made the situation even more puzzling. They were known in the community as quiet, private, and highly disciplined in their routines. Their home was always well maintained, their schedule was predictable, and they rarely interacted beyond polite greetings. Neighbors often remarked on how they never hosted gatherings or allowed anyone inside, but this was dismissed as a preference for privacy rather than anything suspicious. The household followed a strict pattern that never seemed to change, and nothing about their daily life hinted at inner conflict or hidden problems. This polished image created a layer of disbelief when news of the investigation began to spread. People struggled to connect the peaceful picture they had always seen with the mysterious events being reported. Investigators began collecting background details to establish whether any external threats or disputes could explain the situation. They found no records of ongoing conflicts, no recent altercations, and no reports of arguments or disturbances from the residents. Financial statements appeared stable at first glance, and there were no visible signs of stress from debt or legal trouble. Friends and relatives described the family as structured and careful about maintaining appearances. However, this very need for control began to stand out. Every aspect of their life seemed managed to perfection, leaving no room for spontaneity or unexpected behavior. Investigators noted that this level of control, while not a crime on its own, suggested a household focused less on comfort and more on maintaining a certain image. As more information surfaced, it became clear that the family rarely allowed visitors inside their home. Deliveries were often received at the door without anyone stepping inside, and even close relatives described limited access to personal areas of the house. The home functioned more like a private zone than a welcoming residence, which hinted at deeper layers beneath the surface. While neighbors viewed them as respectable, they also recalled how quickly they withdrew whenever personal questions were asked. This consistent avoidance of openness added a subtle but significant detail to the developing profile. Investigators began to see that the lack of visible problems did not necessarily mean the absence of hidden ones. What looked like a peaceful life from the outside might have been carefully built to keep whatever was inside from being exposed. As investigators continued examining the house, they focused on details that most people would overlook. The living room appeared spotless, with every object placed in a way that felt intentional rather than natural. A framed picture had a faint outline in the dust-free area around it, indicating it had recently been moved and then returned to its position. A rug near the hallway showed a slight crease, as if something heavy had been dragged and then adjusted back into place. Although nothing seemed obviously damaged or disturbed, these tiny irregularities suggested a hidden sequence of events before the emergency call was made. Each observation hinted that someone had taken time to inspect and rearrange the scene to create a specific impression before authorities arrived. Investigators also checked access points around the house. All doors and windows were locked securely from the inside, ruling out the possibility of an intruder entering or fleeing the scene unnoticed. Security cameras from neighboring homes were reviewed, and no unfamiliar figures or suspicious movements were detected in the relevant time frame. This discovery narrowed the list of possibilities to those already inside the house. A missing key from the household set added another silent clue. There was no explanation for its absence, and no signs that it had been used by someone outside. Rather than suggesting a break-in, it raised the possibility of internal planning, where someone might have hidden or removed it deliberately. Additionally, investigators found areas of the home that were unusually clean, even compared to the rest of the already tidy space. A specific section of the kitchen floor had been wiped with more care than the surrounding area, as if someone had removed something from that spot. The effort to clean so precisely seemed disproportionate to any accidental spill. These subtle signs, while not enough to prove anything on their own, formed a pattern pointing toward preparation rather than panic. Investigators documented each detail with growing awareness that the scene had been arranged to appear calm and ordinary. The more they observed, the more the environment felt like a carefully crafted display built to hide the moments just before the call was made. Digging deeper into financial and personal records, investigators began to uncover a pattern that contrasted sharply with the family's outward image of stability. Months before the emergency call, a significant insurance policy had been issued involving a member of the household. The policy was processed with unusual speed, raising attention from analysts who reviewed the documentation. It appeared carefully planned, with clauses that would activate only under specific conditions. Further examination revealed that previous insurance activity had also taken place, including an earlier claim that had gone unnoticed at the time. Due to its subtle presentation, the consistency and timing created a timeline that suggested long-term preparation rather than coincidence. Interviews with people who had limited contact with the family revealed another layer of behavior. Each person described interactions that were polite but controlled, as if conversations were always kept on safe topics. No one could recall any emotional openness or spontaneous moments from them. This emotional distance formed an important clue. It suggested that the household functioned on structure rather than connection, leaving space for deliberate planning to go unnoticed. Investigators began to revisit earlier assumptions, realizing that the lack of visible conflict didn't rule out hidden motives. A life polished to perfection could hide intentions that were carefully calculated and shielded behind routines. Records also showed that just weeks before the incident, there had been a quiet change in banking activity. A closed account linked to a confidential policy drew interest from financial crime specialists. The transaction history showed careful withdrawals and transfers that appeared designed to avoid attention. None of the immediate family members had mentioned these financial changes during questioning, which increased suspicion. The pattern suggested that someone had been preparing a safety net or backup plan before the event occurred. The discovery shifted the investigation's perspective entirely. Instead of viewing the incident as a sudden emergency, detectives started seeing it as the conclusion of a silent process. Every document, every transaction, and every controlled behavior seemed to connect to a longer timeline. The perfect image maintained by the family now appeared more like a shield, built to hide the calculated steps that led to the moment captured in the 911 call. This new understanding changed the tone of the investigation from observation to focused pursuit. The release of the 911 call became a turning point in the investigation. Once made public, it drew widespread attention, not only from viewers online, but also from analysts who specialized in evaluating speech patterns during emergency situations. The calm and measured tone stood out immediately. Each word was delivered with careful timing, and the pauses between statements felt unnatural, as if the caller was choosing each phrase rather than reacting instinctively to a crisis. Instead of sounding desperate for immediate medical help, the call gave the impression of someone ensuring their account would be heard exactly as intended. Specialists reviewing the audio noted these elements as indications of premeditation rather than shock. Public reaction grew rapidly, with many pointing out the controlled nature of the call. It became clear that the caller focused more on describing the situation in a composed manner rather than expressing urgency. This observation aligned with the investigators' earlier suspicions that the scene had been arranged before authorities arrived. Detectives revisited details collected from the house and found that each carefully placed object, each clean surface, and each missing item now formed part of a broader pattern. What initially seemed like minor irregularities began to connect like pieces of a carefully structured puzzle. With mounting pressure, investigators pinpointed one household member whose behavior became increasingly noticeable. Their actions before and after the call were consistent with someone monitoring the narrative rather than reacting emotionally to an emergency. Surveillance footage captured subtle movements during the arrival of emergency services that suggested anticipation rather than surprise. They remained composed throughout the process, watching closely as responders documented the scene. This behavior aligned with the profile of someone who had planned the situation and was now ensuring nothing strayed from their intended version of events. As evidence and expert analysis grew stronger, the case shifted from uncertainty to focused direction. The investigation no longer revolved around figuring out what happened, but instead centered on understanding how it had been staged so effectively. The public, now deeply engaged, followed every update, aware that the 911 call meant to present a believable emergency had become the most revealing element of the case. The recording, once intended as proof of innocence, stood as a silent witness to a calculated plan carried out behind a carefully maintained image.